Time for timer, and time to make a week's supply of healthy after-school snacks.
Fighting tooth decay, nutritious treats made up into wagon wheels, the importance of staying active while not drowning your food in condiments. All headlined by snappy animated and sometimes creepy creatures. Sounds like a recipe to teach us something important. But in the end, just another addition to our Saturday morning lineup. The classic PSA and their place in PopCon. Up next. Welcome to PopCon. If you just found us, you probably reached the end of the internet. But we're glad you're here. I'm Victor, this is PopCon, a salute to all pop culture, but mostly the 80s. This isn't the typical video channel recycling the same old topics that everybody else is doing. It's a show, like with production value and everything. Tonight, we're exploring the PSA. No, not the Penile Sensitivity Association. Well, not this time. But the public service announcements. The public service announcements that we all know and we all love from our past, or possibly fear. Like clowns. Do you remember some of those crazy mascots? The PSA began in the 1940s for the war effort. After the war ended, they had to find other vital messages to peddle. The same service that reminded us to buy war bonds and that loose lips sink ships was now reminding us to use the crosswalk. Important stuff indeed. But this is where our story gets interesting, where it always gets interesting. The 1970s and the 1980s.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
This was not the title of a horror movie, but close. It is the 60s, and this startling PSA garnered a different tone. This one directed at our parents as a subtle reminder to check on the kids before settling down for the real horrors, the nightly news. Before it was too late, the networks gave you a chance to catch your kid crawling out the window after curfew. But let's not prolong the story. I've got to get to the 1980s here. However, we should begin with the Ad Council, and that they would make dozens of widely broadcast PSA of various subjects. Not usually as sinister as checking on your children late at night, but networks had to donate some of their marketing time to PSAs for free, and often played the charming 30-second to 1-minute curriculums when kids were watching to make a bigger bang for their educational buck. These were becoming all the more charming with the introduction of kid-friendly mascots who could help keep topics relatable. Smokey the Bear, McGruff, and Mr. Yuck were faces we could trust. The Mr. Yuck campaign was everywhere, and I was so totally involved when it came to my school, and they handed out all those Mr. Yuck stickers. I went right home and put it on everything, much to the annoyance of my mother. But what did she expect? I was the lieutenant of the crossing guard team. It wasn't long before networks had a flash of inspiration, like a kite stuck in a power line, create their own branded PSA. This may have irked the Ad Council, but the networks were playing PSA, so they were in the clear. Branded with characters and celebrities from their own content, as well as themed jingles and animation, this would identify what station brought you what topic. A great idea when the PSA sacrificed the all-important advertising dollar, so why not make them advertise your network? This way, they could control the content and its schedule. Saturday mornings became the main target. That's when you had the most youth viewers all in one place for about 4-hour stretch of sugar cereal and animated goodness. Let's start at CBS. Why? Because they seem to have the least memorable PSAs. In the early 70s, Josie and the Pussycats hosted In the Know. There is little known about these PSAs, and I can find no video evidence. However, that did quickly morph into In the News between 1971 and 1986, between our favorite cartoons. Sadly, and I believe for many of you, trying to make politics and hijackings relatable to kids between Super Friends and Looney Tunes just gave us an excuse to use the bathroom. Commercials weren't even bathroom break options in those days. I couldn't possibly risk missing the commercial for the newest toy that I briefly caught last week. I could sacrifice the kid news to go pee, though. Can you imagine waiting a week to catch a commercial for a movie or a toy? We did it, and we liked it. CBS had another campaign that was also a little dry, but hoped they could capture family audiences who might be watching their weekend movies together. A joint effort with the Library of Congress, after the poignant movie, Read More About It, encouraged the viewer to go to their library and find out more about the subject. So, if you were watching the Karen Carpenter story, then find out more about eating disorders. In the 21st century, CBS Cares finally tapped into their denizen of celebrity, and they were the first ever to produce a tolerance PSA. Successfully continuing today, CBS Cares has produced campaigns to celebrate Black History Month, Asian Pacific American Heritage, Hispanic Heritage, and Native American Heritage as well. Now, NBC hit it out of the park with youngsters in the form of One to Grow On from 1983 to 1989. And like the extra candle on your birthday cake, or the punch in the arm, it was designed to offer you advice on ethical dilemmas and personal safety to get you through another year of life. NBC celebrities were there out the gate to introduce the situation and then come back with a solution to the dilemma, as One to Grow On. I have to wonder if these were the NBC personalities that couldn't make the cut on Battle of the Network Stars. Remember that one? If you want me to do an episode about those, let me know in the comments. This campaign smoothly transitioned to The More You Know in 1989, and that animated shooting star is not only still seen today, but lives on in our pop consciousness. Now, there is no denying that when networks began to produce their own PSA, ABC ruled. Who doesn't remember Time for Timer, Yuckmouth, and his ouch, a cavity from the Bod Squad? And most importantly, the longest-running educational animated short series, Schoolhouse Rock. These efforts ran concurrently long after their debut. Schoolhouse Rock is the most memorable teaching tool and can be streamed today on Disney+. But the topics of brushing, healthy food, easing up on condiments, and the munchies, no, not those munchies, are still valid today as ever. So, how many of those do you remember? Let me know in the comments if there are others that you recall more fondly. Saturday mornings are hard to imagine without the PSA. Isn't it just like the ad council to make us think, to learn a valuable lesson? Nobody got time for that while watching Saturday morning cartoons. Can you believe it, though? They must have been on the right track. I mean, we're still talking about them, right? Next. Truthfully, although the ad council may have frowned at the networks for minimalizing their work and considering them just ads for their own network, they had the star power behind them, including the animated ones, and showed respectful results in the 80s. In 1985 alone, the average 228 calls to the domestic violence hotline quadrupled, and the More You Know campaign earned an Emmy Award. PSAs were impactful, and it was a perfect marriage of our cartoon heroes and the undivided attention the networks were counting on. Oh, PSAs still exist today. It may surprise you to know that most of these classics were made in the 70s, but they ran from their premiere through the 80s and even some of them into the 90s unchanged. And although some of these concepts are still valid today, public service announcements of this age would probably do well to include other topics that would never have thought to be served back then. But believe me, the most extreme PSA of the 80s was yet to come.
I watched this great video, but don't remember the name of it.
Didn't you subscribe to the channel?
Subscribing is the best thing you can do. Commenting is awesome.
Subscribing?
Means you support the creator's content.
It was mostly about 80s pop culture.
That was probably PopCon. It's outrageous.
Okay, I'll go subscribe right away.
Remember, subscribing to PopCon makes you a superstar.
Champ!
First Lady Nancy Reagan had started Just Say No, a campaign against drug use long before First Lady Barbara Bush joined her husband to introduce the most iconic PSA ever, Cartoon Heroes to the Rescue. This one will go down in history, but more on that at the end. As debatable as the success of the campaign seems today, the truth was the 80s included a fair amount of increased drug use and dealing that came to the forefront and challenged our families and kids in a way it had never done before. Crack was exploding on the scene and dealers were everywhere. Just Say No valiantly tried to stop more people from becoming customers for the dealers, to a problem that had quickly risen out of control in the era of excess. Countless stars used their celebrity status and characters to help deliver a message to young people to think real hard about the effects of drug use on your body, mind, finances, and family. Clint Eastwood, Pee Wee Herman, Burt Reynolds, and even a young Rachel Lee Cook joined Nancy Reagan, taking the brain on drugs mother of all ads to various new levels. Very few animated characters got into the serious fray with this one, but to some lesser degree, their celebrity status was not off the table. As you see, it comes with Superman, and eventually with He-Man and even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Superman, man, am I glad to see you.
What are you doing on this deserted road?
Some guys from school drove out here and we're going to start fooling around with drugs. When I told them all drugs do is mess up your head and get you in a lot of trouble, they kicked me out of the van and drove off.
You're right not to get involved in the drug scene. Nobody with any sense wants any part of it.
How do I get home?
That's no problem at all.
Scare tactics were the unintentional hook of Just Say No. Yes, to many now and then, it was condescending adult rhetoric that was counterproductive unless there was something to say yes to. But the 80s crack epidemic was growing, and if we didn't handle it with understanding and compassion, then the efforts were going to come up short. This knee-jerk reaction was met and raised by MTV with something a bit more radical.
Drugs suck.
The usual tactics didn't work for those already uphill skiing, so along comes the talking heads of the music generation. RAD, or Rock Against Drugs, took the campaign in a whole other direction. Bombarding viewers of MTV when teens had it on 24/7, the method initiated by the media giant had folks like Belinda Carlisle, Gene Simmons of Kiss, Ted Nugent, Bon Jovi, Vince Neil, and Stephen James being a bit more honest. Well, okay, slightly less contrived than the Just Say No counterpart. Each artist clearly handled their ad personally, and in their own way, all while trying not to sideline their rebel rock edge, as few could doubt that many of these idols had not engaged in the booger sugar. No one may know the true impact of these campaigns, but kids did write MTV, admitting that these musicians were the only ones that they would listen to, and they had effectively stopped using upon hearing it come from their royalty. Each ad ended with crashing glass and spray-painted logo, reminding you that while drugs are not good, vandalism is an alternative. I think everyone can admit that there is no easy answer, and they certainly don't come in 15 or 30-second PSAs on TV. But perhaps a 32-minute animated adventure that would close out the 80s and lead us into the changing world of the 90s would do.
Oh, what's that funny smell? I hate to suggest this, but my guess would be marijuana.
Cartoon All-Stars to the rescue. Today this would be unheard of, but truthfully, why not? Winnie the Pooh and Papa Smurf seem totally equipped to help a teenager battling with drug addiction. Okay, add Baby Kermit and Michelangelo of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle with Garfield and the animated Alf, and you do have a tiny little army. Then take a scary trip with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and you have the makings of either a great rehab or simply an LSD trip. We can all agree that the talents of Menken and Ashman brought us to joyous tears with the strains of the score from 1989's The Little Mermaid. However, their song, Wonderful Ways to Say No, did not have the same emotional connection and is not considered a classic. But hell, that is some talent rounded up for this common good. This television special and combination of cartoon characters, animation studio, networks, cable, voice actors, etc. was one epic night of Community where the longest, most daring anti-drug PSA was shown simultaneously to a captivated audience. Either glued to the set due to the sensitive subject matter, or mesmerized at Baby Miss Piggy and Tigger leading our come-to-life cartoon heroes in the most epic intervention unmatched by man. Frightening, but with an impact. Especially when you consider that Bugs and Daffy and even Slimer get into the action to save this teenager on a dozen of networks and cable stations the night of April 21st, 1990. Alright, let's lighten this weighty load and remind ourselves they're just PSAs. Today's PSA may not have the same impact or staying power of those that riddled us with their messages in decades prior. And we may never again see memorable characters teaching us life lessons like Woodsy Owl teaching us to pitch a tent, or that smoking hot bear about being on fire. But many of us still remember the wagon wheel or Yuck Mouth with gleeful abandon. Any current incarnation may not have the longevity that those in the Saturday morning glory days amassed. But like I said, many of my fellow Gen Xers must have absorbed some of that content. However, when I look around, I have a feeling we didn't do as good a job as they did in passing it down to our children. We didn't even scratch the surface of the most memorable PSAs ever created in the 1980s. I'm talking the moral lesson tagged finale delivered by your favorite cartoon hero type of PSA. I guess that'll just have to wait until part 2. So there's a little history into the legacy of the PSA in our pop consciousness. And now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Until next time.
Get away from her.